Hi guys, can you hear me? Okay, so I think everyone can hear me and also the video is visible on the page. So do we start? Yeah, I think we should start now. So the topic for today is porn and games. So before we start learning about porn and games, there are a few things we need to know. These are quite important if you want to play porn and games well. Okay, so some general rules of porn and games. Porn games are usually quite concrete. Even the smallest changes can just change the outcome of the game. Here, more than general principles, you need to know how to calculate properly. Also, the study of porn in games is not exactly about memorizing certain positions, but you use some common techniques which you learn. This will make your task much easier and quicker. Okay, so also many porn in games are like just clearly defined. It could be about even a single tempo in many situations. Like for example, when there's a pawn race going on, which side will queen first, or which side comes first to stop the passed pawn. These kind of things. Also, of course, there are pawn in games in which it's important to maneuver the king, and concepts like Zoog Swang become important. So, obviously, end games which require certain maneuvers are more complicated than the rapid pawn in games. Rapid pawn in games are the one which are usually kind of races and all, and can be calculated. These end games you can usually calculate to the end even. Yeah, so some important concepts which you definitely need to know are key squares, corresponding squares, and also opposition. So for now, we'll first deal with key squares. Okay, key squares are the squares, the occupation by the king which causes victory. I mean, regardless of whose move it is. So, for example, let's look at this position on the board. So, regardless of whose move it was, if white were to occupy the squares a7, b7, or c7, he'll be winning. Yeah, when the pawn is on the sixth rank, when the pawn is on the fifth rank, also the squares directly ahead of it are key squares. So, for example, these squares. So, if white were to occupy these squares, he would be winning. So, what do you think white should play here? Should he go to c6 or to e6? Okay, so does everyone think it's c6? Yeah, even though c6 is the most obvious move, it's actually inaccurate because white simply has to come back to the same position again. The reason is if white tries to progress the pawn, it will be a stalemate. So king c6 is not correct in this position. The right move here is king to a6 because now there will be no stalemate ideas and the pawn can move smoothly. For example, black has to play now king c7 or king c8 or even king a8, of course. Then you just move the pawn. No matter what he does, there won't be a stalemate. He'll always have one move available. So just b7. He has to go to c7. Now, of course, just king a7, and your pawn is queening on the next move. So just to recap, the key squares for the king in this position were a7, b7, c7, c6, and a6. Yeah, and regardless of whose move it is, if the white king were in these squares, it would be a win for white. Okay, so now let's move on to the second example. Okay, so I need you to tell me which are the key squares for white in this position. Okay, so a6, b6, c6. Anything else? No other answers? Okay, so let's move on. The key squares for white in this position are a6, b6, and c6. The squares directly ahead 2 files of the pawn. So if the white king were to reach these squares, it would be a win for white. So obviously he has to go there. That is why king c2. Now black's only idea is to try and stop the king from entering these squares. If you were to move to the king side, it would be pointless because then the pawn just queens. So black comes there. Now white just follows through with his idea. So okay, now this is the critical part. White has two choices: king c4 and also king a4. I wanted to answer which choice do you think is the correct one: king to c4 or king to a4? Okay, so we have one answer saying king to c4 and two answers saying king to a4. Okay, so even though king c4 looks quite direct, it's actually wrong. Now black will just stop the pawn from advancing. He takes opposition with king to c6, and there's no way to make progress. This position will just. Yeah. So now there's no way for white to make progress here. That is why the correct answer here is king to a4. You need to go furthest away from the king. The further you go, the harder it becomes for the king to stop you from entering these squares. Because entering any of these squares is a win for white. Okay, so black tries to stop white with king to c6. Now obviously king to a5, not b5 check. b5 check would be a mistake because of king b6. So white goes king to a5. Now the threat is simply king to a6 and pushing the pawn. So black tries to stop it. But now, anyway, white is winning. Because if he takes the option, next move he's going to enter the key squares. Now, no matter where black moves, white is just going to enter. If here, then this king c6. So basically, black is wrong. Zugzwang is the position in which the side to move is at a disadvantage. So white wins, just entering the key squares by a4. Now, just to recap, let's just have a look again. So white's idea is to enter either of these squares, c6, b6, or a6. And that it does. Now it's important to move further away from the king, as further as possible, so that it becomes difficult for the king to catch you. And when he stops you from entering one of the key squares, you just take the opposition and next move will enter the key square regardless. Okay, so now let's move to the next one. Okay, so this is white to play. And obviously, he has to win this endgame because this pawn is going to fall. Okay, so the first move is quite obvious. King f2. Now king g1 would be a big mistake here. Because then black just defends the pawn. Yeah, and the pawn is defended on h5. And there's simply no way for white to make any progress. So there is king to f2. Yeah, and black obviously, if black just tries to defend the pawn here, then the pawn will be lost. King d7 is just met by king g3, king a6, king h4. And no matter what black does, the pawn is lost. So this is a very easy win for white. That is why black only has one move here. Can you see what black can do here to defend? Okay, so we have a few answers saying king d7 and both king d7 and king d8 are not good because white just picks up the pawn. And there's no way to save this endgame for black because since the pawn is on g2, he always has a few spare moves. Yeah, the correct answer is h4. This is the only try for black. Now you might be wondering why this is so good because king f3 and white just picks up the pawn, right? But the answer is he cannot. So what's the problem with king f3 here? Yeah, exactly. The problem with king f3 is that black has the move h3. And obviously just taking the pawn is a very easy draw. Because black will simply stop you here. So the only other try for white here is e4. But even this doesn't work. Squares for the pawn here are f6, g6 and h6. And there is no way white can enter that without stopping this while stopping this pawn. So black just controls these squares. And he's easily in time to draw the game. So the correct way for white to play this position is instead of king f3, he goes king g1. And obviously, black's only try here is h3. And now it's an important point of the game. You should be careful here. The obvious move g4 is bad. Because now again the king can enter the key squares. And you'll never really have a spare move with the pawn. That is why it's very important to play king to g3. The pawn to g3. Now the key squares are nearer to the king. And you'll always have a spare move with g4 if you need it. So black just tries to enter the key squares and defend. Obviously, white just picks up the pawn. Yeah, and here the important move king g4. Now black is again in zugzwang. No matter what he does, white is going to enter the key squares. So if he moves here, white just goes here. And if he moves here, white just goes here. And it's a very easy win for white. Okay, so in this game we saw that what things to avoid. and how even some moves which don't look obvious can be the best. So it's important here for white to enter via g1 and then move the pawn only one square ahead so that the key squares of the pawn are nearer to the king. Yeah. And then you just occupy the key squares and push the pawn. Okay. So in this position, the player playing. Okay, so there's a YouTube link needed for the video. Just a second. Yeah. So here the player playing black just resigned. Sorry, the player playing white just resigned the game. But of course, as we already seen, it's not a loss. White just sorry. Yeah. So white is just going to hold this game. There's no way for black to make progress here in this position. I'm sorry. He just moves king e2 to d3. Okay. So this was played by the yeah, it was played by one of the best players of the world in his time, Rudolf Spielmann. So here he played the very bad move rook to f4. So does this draw for white, or is there a way for black to win? Yeah, so we have some answers saying king g5 and rook takes f4. Rook takes f4 is a mistake here because then white is controlling the key squares and there's no way for black to enter. So white just defends like this. And it's always a stalemate in the end. So that would be a mistake. Instead, the correct move here is king to g5. Now white is forced to take the rook and black just recaptures. Now no matter what white does, he's going to get control of the key squares. The key squares for black here are e4, f4, and g4. So if white goes to g3, black just comes to e4. And if white goes to e3, black just comes to g4. And this is an easy win. Okay, so now we are going to know what the concept of opposition is. Okay, so let's look at this game as an example. So opposition is basically the position in which the two kings are standing on the same file with one square separating them. So what it means to get opposition is to have this position with your opponent to move. This would mean that he is in Zugzwang. So as we already know, being in Zugzwang means the side the side who has the moves at a disadvantage. Yeah. So just for an example, the king on b7 and the king on b5. They're opposite to each other with only one file separating them. Yeah. So here, white has the opposition because it is black to move. But this is one of those cases where even though white has the opposition, he cannot win. So what does black play here? King c7 or king a7? There are two options. Yeah, king a7 here would be a big mistake because then white just exchanges these pawns. And in this position, having the opposition just decides the game. Here just king b5. And white gets the opposition. Now black is forced to go king c7 and then king c5. So next move, white is going to occupy one of these squares. And he'll win easily. So if king b7, white just goes king b6. If king b7, white goes to d6. So the correct answer here was king to c7. Now the only way for white to make any progress would be king to a6. Because c5 is pointless. Since we all know that this is an easy draw with the rook pawn. White will just black will just stay in the corner and there'll be no way to make progress. Okay. So here an important decision. In this position, whether he goes to c8 or c5, sorry, c7 or c5. So what should black do here? Yeah, the correct way for black to play is king to c7. Because king to c5 would just lose here to king b5. Now if you take this pawn, white just takes and this pawn is going to queen. So this is a mistake. Now white plays king to a8. Now black only has one good move here. Is should black go back low king to c6 or king to c8? So the correct way to maintain opposition is with king to c8. And now white has no way to make any progress. Black is just winning with white runs out of squares. This is the important move king f1. Now no matter what white does, black is going to pick up the f3 pawn. So what is the correct move for white here? Okay, so we have two answers. One is king to f2 and one is king to f1. Okay, so let's first see king to f2. King to f2 would be a mistake because you're just giving black the opposition. No matter what you do, he's going to get the opposition. This, for example. And he wins the pawn. Even with this, he just wins the pawn again. So even king f1 in this position would be a mistake. Because black just gets the opposition. He has to come via d3. So this way, wherever you move, he's going to get the opposition. That is why the best move for white in this position is the surprising move king to h1. It's controlling these key squares. So now white doesn't allow black to get the opposition. King g2 would be a mistake because black just gets the opposition with king e2 again. So he's just maintaining opposition like this. And now there's no way for black to make any progress. Also, black can try g4 here. Of course, taking this would be bad because black is queening first. And he just wins. But white has this move, king g2. Now if takes, white is just picking off this pawn. So this is how white is able to draw this. So here we see a very surprising kind of opposition, in which white is not allowing black to get the opposition. So it just prevents him from making any progress like this. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, so now this is a little difficult. Now obviously if white just plays randomly, black is going to pick up the pawns. So white has to do something. Let's see if you can find what white needs to do here. Yeah. So one thing which I forgot to mention was the concept of distant opposition. So now we all know what opposition is. When the kings are at the same file with one square separating them. But distance opposition is when there's a difference of three squares. So even the side with the distance distant opposition is at an advantage. So now let's see, is there a way for black to make use of that here? Now king g4 would not be good because black just plays king g4. Sorry, king g2 I mean. Now next he's going to pick up both these pawns. And with the pawn on the starting rank, it's an easy win for black. Also f5 would not be good because he can still take the pawn. And this pawn falls and black is going to win easily. Now this is a winning position for black. Because with the pawn here, he always has a spare move. Okay, now no matter what you do, black is going to win this. Or even king g2. Even if you get the opposition, black always has an extra move. So black again gets back the opposition. And now he's going to enter the key squares. This is going to be an easy win. The important thing to remember is that when you have a pawn like this, you always have one spare move with the pawn. So even if your opponent has the opposition, he'll have to give it up like this. So the correct and only move for white here is g6. Obviously, if king g6, then white just defends this pawn, and it's going to be an easy draw. So black has to take this pawn, and now simply f5. Now king g2 again would be a mistake because of king g4. And here black takes back with the pawn. So white has to play f5 and black plays pawn f5. Now the crucial move king to g1. So even though black controls a distant opposition, there's no use. And white is just going to draw this. The key squares of the pawn are this. And there's no way for black to make entry. Sorry, let me just check again. Yeah, so white is just going to get the opposition. So this white displays this. And black can never win the game. Okay, so let's look at this. So we saw the concept of distant opposition. So you see how white is going to make use of this. Okay, so what is the best move for white here? Okay, so there are a few answers saying king d6. Even though king d6 is the most obvious move, it's not the right way to play. Because then black just grabs the opposition, as you can see. And he just maintains it. So there's no way to make progress. The correct continuation for white here is king to f5. He is aiming to take the distant opposition, as you can see. So obviously black has to play king b6. And now again the same idea. He wants to take the opposition. Because if now black goes king c7, white just takes the opposition with king e7. Yeah. And the pawns fall. So king f6 is the only way to make progress, aiming to take opposition. Now obviously black doesn't want to play king c7 because it gives white the opposition. So he goes king b7. Now it's important not to go king e7 here because black takes back the opposition. That's why white goes king f7. Now again the same thing. If black comes king c7, he takes back the opposition. So black doesn't do that. And he goes back to king b6. Now white is coming from the corner. Now again the same idea. If he goes king c7, king e7. So he can never come there. And also king b7 would be met by king d7, and then king b6, king d6. White gets the opposition. So black has to go to a7. And now if white comes to d7, he gets the opposition. This maneuver by white is called outflanking, gaining opposition in this way. So again, white just comes from here. Now the idea is the same. If king b6, king d6, king b7, then king d7, and white gains the opposition. So black has to go to a8. Now what should white play here? You're just winning the pawn. So this is bad. Now no matter what black does, white is going to get the opposition. So this, he just comes here. If this, still he just comes here. As you saw in this position, there was no direct way to get the opposition. So white used a maneuver called outflanking, taking the opposition this way. Both sides don't want the other side to get the opposition. And whoever gets the opposition is going to win. So he took the opposition in indirect way, trying to place the opponent in Zugzwang. Now, as you already know, Zugzwang means the side with the move is at a disadvantage. So here it's important not to take the pawn and give back the opposition. You just maintain the opposition and come like this, forcing black to give the opposition. And then the pawns will fall one by one. So both these pawns are going to fall. And it's an easy win for white. Okay, so in this position, one of the best players of the world at the time, Tartakover, miscalculated and went for the move queen takes b4. But this is a mistake. He had seen up to this and thought that it's an easy win because white just takes the pawn and he gains the opposition. But he missed something very critical. Yeah, exactly. So king b2 would be a huge mistake because then black just takes the pawn and gains the opposition. So no matter what you move, black is going to enter one of the key squares. So if king c2, black is going to come to a3. Or if king a2, black is going to come to c3. So white just maintains this position now. King b3, of course, would be a stalemate. There's no way to make progress. All you have to make sure is that you don't take this pawn and game the opposition. And there's an easy draw. Okay, so in this position, black played this move rook f5. So do you think this is correct? Okay, so we have few answers: king e4 and rook f5. Rook f5 would be a mistake because the black king can enter, and he'll create a passed pawn. So this will be a win for black. So the correct way to play for white here is king to e4. And now black went for this pawn in game with rook g5. And even though white has the opposition now, black was counting on the move f6. And he thought this should be a win for him. Yeah, so what should white play here? He's under check. Yeah, so we have few answers: king f3 and king e4. King e4 would be a mistake here because you're just giving him the opposition. And then black will enter. But the opposition on the e file is fatal for white. But on the other hand, the opposition on the f file is meaningless. So king f3 is the right way for black to play. Obviously, the most important move to consider is king f5. But here white has g4. And there's simply no way to make any progress. Even with the two pawns, because they're doubled, they're just equal to one pawn. And white is going to draw this quite easily. So white just maintains the opposition. And the game ended in a draw. Since if black creates a passer on the h file, it's meaningless. Since rook pawn endgames are always drawn. Okay, so the topics which we learned today are key squares. So the squares which the king needs to enter in order to win, regardless of whose move it is, and opposition, and also distant opposition. One more maneuver which we saw was outflanking. gaining opposition in indirect manner, and also preventing your opponent from gaining the opposition. Okay, so I think this is it for today. So any questions or doubts? What? Okay, guys, then see you next time, and good night.